Welcome to the War Zone. This is Scruffy Tales, and I am Scruffy. So, with the new year coming at us, I was wondering, or thinking rather, the other day, where will Ukraine strike next in order to try and throw Russia out of the country? So, I figured we would make a video about that. Uh, but first, let's take a look at what's going on at Avdiivka. And we all know where Avdiivka is located on the map, and we all know that Russia has made some gains over the last couple of days. So let's take a look. And if we take a look at my previous videos, we can go back all the way back to the 6th of December. I made a video where I was talking about what the Russians were trying to achieve in Avdiivka. And I highlighted that they were most likely trying to go through the water treatment plant and get into the forests and into the suburban area in order to bypass the factory and cut off the main supply route into Avdiivka. And I also highlighted why, because here, fighting in the factory, they would need a 10-to-1 advantage in order to push through. But going through the forest, they only need a 3-to-1 advantage, and in a suburban area, a 5-to-1 advantage. So it seemed logical that they would try and push through this way in order to reach the main supply route. And then on the 12th, they were pushing into the suburbs here. So I highlighted that they would now be outflanking the water treatment plant, and then they could outflank Ukrainian positions in the forest if they kept on pushing down into the suburbs. And by the 22nd of December, as you can see, I suggested that the Russians were going to go through the suburbs and through the forest in order to cut through the area here to reach the main supply line. And so what happened? Well, here you go. They pushed through the suburbs and the forests and contested the suburbs here, and then went straight through the area here and went for the main supply line, just like I predicted months ago. And I did it, like I said, based on the fact that you would need insane amounts of troops to attack the factory, and it would make more sense of going through the forests and the suburbs in order to reach this very vital road. So there was no point in attacking the factory, and I don't know why other people suggested they should have done it. It made no sense at all. And then the other day I said that before they got this far, that they would probably go through this patch here and through the warehouses here. And they kind of did, and they did swing down this way, but as you can see, this was all contested. And then, boom, they went straight through the area that I had been talking about, and now they are in control of the supply line, of the supply route, and have cut off supplies to Avdiivka via this main supply route, at least. So this is the situation. Yeah, I was planning on making this video a couple of days ago on the 11th or 12th, so that is why I'm still using this map. So Russia came down this way, like I said, and they have now cut off this main supply line into the city here. Ukraine will more than likely fortify the factory like crazy. They probably have been doing that for a couple of months, and they can still supply the factory. They have a road here, and they can use the supply route here to keep sending reinforcements and ammunition and what have you into the factory. So this will be a proper fortress. And question is if Russia will try and assault it. My guess is they will try and surround it completely, continue with the breach here to move in around it, and potentially maybe even through Stepova up here, come down from the north as well. And Russia has also the opportunity to keep pushing southward to reach this road here. And this is now the last supply route for Ukraine into Avdiivka. And that causes some issues. Yes, they can still defend the city. They still have an open supply line. But they only have this one supply line. So Russia can just send in every drone they have, basically, and have them hover over the road and wait for trucks and vehicles and what have you to appear, and then just move in and destroy every logistics truck trying to reach the city, or every ambulance trying to leave the city. So this is not ideal for Ukraine. And if Ukraine wants to abandon the city, this road will probably be gridlocked by all the vehicles leaving, and then Russia can just call in artillery and it will become a road of death. But personally, I think Ukraine has already begun evacuating, and that is why we're seeing these big, massive advances from the Russians, because there's basically not that many Ukrainians left holding the city. I think Ukraine will abandon the city, maybe try and cause as much damage as possible before finally getting the heck out of Dodge, and then they will focus on holding the factory and try and use it to get as many kills as possible before Russia eventually, potentially during the spring and summer, surrounds the factory as well. So that's what I think is going on. I think Ukraine has already more or less abandoned the city, and they are now preparing to defend the factory for another couple of months. And maybe Russia will be able to surround it late spring, early summer. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, I don't think the fight here is over yet. I think the next fight will be for the factory, or at least surrounding it. Right, let's talk about new leadership. And General Zaluzhny has been kicked out and been replaced by General Syrsky. And could be the right move. Zaluzhny failed with his counteroffensive, and then went public about it, made an article that got a lot of attention, where he said, put the blame on himself, and he also blamed Ukrainian leadership for not providing him basically with enough troops, for not conscripting enough troops, basically. And he also came up with mentioned all these weird solutions to how they could breach the minefields and what have you. Wasn't the best idea, I think, to publicly announce that he felt he needed more troops, and publicly announced that he failed in his plans and all of that stuff. So I understand why they removed him, to be honest. And now he's been replaced by General Syrsky. So we got new blood, new ideas, and to shake things up. And probably this guy has probably some orders to not go public with his opinions on matters. But being the new guy, with orders to shake things up and with orders to win a war, there's also a lot of pressure. And he basically needs to find out how to somehow breach the Russian lines, get through the minefields, or get around them in order to win the war and liberate the country. So who is this guy? Well, he's not a noob by any means. He oversaw the defenses of Kiev during the initial stages of the Russian invasion in April of 2022. And later that same year, he was in charge of the impressive Kharkiv offensive in August of 2022, when the Ukrainians took the Russians by complete surprise. and managed to effectively outmaneuver them and push them back by dozens of miles over a couple of days. And then he was, of course, also in charge of the defense of Bakhmut during 2023, during those months of insane combat where the Russians were just throwing bodies at the Ukrainian defenders. And all in all, he has earned a reputation for relying on aggressive tactics, Soviet tactics that results in high casualties. I don't know if it's true or not, but there seems to be soldiers seems to dislike him based on the fact that he throws Ukrainian troops into the meat grinder, hoping to bludgeon the Russians into submission, basically. I don't know, soldiers tend to hate generals as a rule, so I don't think there's anything to it, to be honest. It's more than likely soldiers having a grudge, as they always do with high command, especially so since General Syrskyi is born Russian. So, I mean, you can imagine Ukrainian troops having some ill will towards a general that is not Ukrainian, but who is actually Russian. But he's not in a fun position, but because, I mean, he has immense pressure on him to achieve and to win. And he needs to make some hard choices in order to make that happen. And so I predict that that is what we will see this year. Some very hard choices made by the Ukrainians in order to win this war. So when will we see Ukraine's next offensive? I think we will see it this year, actually, despite the lack of manpower, despite the lack of equipment, because the longer Ukraine waits, the harder the fight will be, the more time Russia will have to fortify and strengthen the Surovikin line and other defensive positions along the front line. So even if Ukraine may not be ready this year to actually go on the offensive, if they wait the next year again in 2025, it may be too late, because then Russia will have dug themselves into the ground, into the bedrock, and there is just no way that Ukraine can hope to break through and throw them out. So they have no choice. Ready or not, they have to breach the Russian defensive lines this year. Otherwise, then you will have a proper stalemate where Ukraine cannot budge the Russians whatsoever. So where will Ukraine attack? Well, we saw them attack here and here last summer, and and then during the fall, they pushed across the Dnieper at Terny, but they haven't been able to go beyond these initial stages of the assault since then. And I mean, the Russians have obviously fortified these positions immensely over the months here to deny any further Ukrainian pushes come spring and summer. So, I mean, Ukraine probably won't stand a chance of continuing at these positions because Russia will have fortified each location to hell and back. That said, I will at the end return to this location because I think this is actually where Ukraine might launch the offensive, despite what I just said. Will they attack at Bakhmut in order to reach Luhansk? No, I don't think so. First of all, it is really easy for Russia to send in reinforcements and supplies and what have you to reinforce this section of the front line. And that is why they are so determined to gain ground up here in the north. Short supply lines, easy to send in troops, manpower, supplies. And same thing applies to should Ukraine try and push through towards Luhansk. And also, Bakhmut is located here, and the Russian defensive line is way back here. So Ukraine first have to deal with Bakhmut, then grab a dozen or so small towns before they even reach the proper defensive line. So that's just not going to happen. But all previous year and all throughout this year, Russia will just keep building on the defenses they have here. I read somewhere the other day that they have begun placing railroad carts, trains along railway systems and use them as actual fortifications. Basically, you have a railroad and you place trains back to back on the railroad system, creating huge defensive walls that you can't just breach, because there are trains in a way. So Russia, they are building and improving their defenses every day, and if Ukraine doesn't do anything this year, I don't know how they will be able to get anything done beyond 2024. They have to breach the defenses this year. And yeah, and if we take a look at the southern front line here, this is where Ukraine pushed in, and they also tried to come down this way along a highway that would take them all the way down to the sea. And I mean, it took them months to go from Vasilka and Vasilka down here, and from Orkiv here down here. And they failed. They didn't get through even the first line of defense that the Russians had set up. And now the Russians obviously know what the Ukrainian game plan was, so they will have fortified these positions like crazy, and more than likely elsewhere as well. It's not like this defensive work has stopped. The Russians will keep putting down mines all along the front line, and they will keep building trenches and dugouts and what have you. So this is a race against the clock. And Ukraine, they can't wait. They need to gather manpower and they need to get going. So come spring, I think things will turn real ugly somewhere along the front line, because Ukraine, they need to breach before Russia properly locks the entire front line down and denying Ukraine any chance to getting through. And I have a couple of ideas where I think Ukraine will actually push through. And so we will go through them in sequence. And this one, the push through Vasilivka, was actually one of the locations where you voted that they were to be most likely to try and attempt to breach the Russian defenses. And at the time of recording, we have 82 votes, and 29% voted for this option. And we're at the edge of the main front line, southern front line, at the Great Dam. And here we have Vasilivka, and this is where Ukraine could potentially launch an assault and try and break through. Because if they did, I mean, the northern front line here then would be safe, because it's a big ass lake. There won't be any Russians up here, so if you follow the lake, then your flank will be secure, and you don't have to worry about getting outflanked from this end. And then you could breach through all the way here, and what you want to do then is to get through and swing down south towards this bay here, because then, as you can see here, you can cut off the Russians completely from being reinforced from Crimea, and the guys over here, the Russians over here, can't get any support from friendlies in the east. So that is what the Ukrainians could be trying to do if they go through Vasilivka. Punch through the defenses and then swing down south and cut the Russian forces in half, essentially. You also have a big highway here that you can move through and begin to threaten Melitopol. And you could potentially continue along the lake and continue along the river, since the northern flank will be secure, and try and punch through all the way to Kherson and reaching the troops that are crossing the Dnipro. Yeah, sure, but I'm not convinced that this is the best idea. And the reason is, well, I mean, take a look at all the Russian defensive lines in place here around Vasilivka. The Russians have obviously thought about this and realized that this is a big threat. Ukraine can reach the landmass between the lake and the bay and cut the Russians in half, and they can keep moving along the shoreline in order to link up with friendly forces further west. So they have built a lot of defenses around Vasilivka for that reason. And then if Ukraine wants to reach Vasilivka, and I mean, they first have to cross this river, and they need to secure all these bridges to do so, and grab all these small towns outside of Vasilivka. I mean, you need Pidime, Shiroke, you need Shaloni High, and stuff like that. And even if they do that, I mean, take a look at all the defensive lines. And Vasilivka itself, it's going to be a fortress, just like Bakhmut. Going through all of this, and then after this, you need to go through this, and then have troops, more troops, in order to swing down south and grab all of this territory here. I don't think that this is very likely. This is probably not what the Ukrainians will attempt this year. Next potential point of attack for the Ukrainians is a small town called Samlivka. And you probably don't know where it is, you probably never heard of it, and that is because there's been no fighting in and around it. So I will highlight where it is and exactly why it is potentially a point of interest for Ukraine. And here we go. And so here we have the front lines in the south, Vasilivka over here. And so we are going to be focusing on this area. Sorry. And last year, Ukraine trying to push down this highway here. You have Urushaine, you had what's the town? Marinka, I think a town was called. And they wanted this highway here, and you know, they failed. They didn't even reach the Surovikin line. And even if they had reached this Surovikin line, I mean, the Russians knew that the Ukraine wanted, more than likely would more than likely have tried to push along this road. So they built up proper defenses right here in these towns and all along the road. And we have a big hill here and a couple of other hills as well. So they knew that Ukraine more than likely was going to try and go down this road, and they built defenses to hold it. So even if Ukraine had reached these towns, would they have been able to punch through? Who knows? That said, take a look at this. Here you have a massive gap in the Russian defenses. So potentially, if Ukraine wants, they could try and, instead of using this highway, they could go down this road here instead. Because this road, just like this highway here, goes all the way down to the sea. So, which would allow Ukraine to cut the Russian forces in half. God damn it, sorry. And as you can see here, this is the road they would need to secure and move along. And here we have Samlivka in the red box, located here. So Ukraine could potentially move from Pryotne down this main road in order to breach the Russian defenses and reach Samlivka. Again, this is troublesome. I mean, you have basically 8 kilometers of farmland to cross, filled with mines. And again, the Russians, they realize that this road here is important, because look at all the trenches built along this main road here. And then you have layers upon layers of defenses right here, where they suspect that the Ukrainians might be making an attempt to breach. So tempting to try and get through here and then thunder run down the road here because of this massive gap, but you still need 8, 10, 12 kilometers to cross 8 to 12 kilometers of farmland, and that are, you know, filled to the brim with mines. So this is not the best option for Ukraine either, I feel. Next, it's gonna get interesting. I admit that the next option will be interesting, and that is going over the water. And this actually got, what was this, 24% of the votes. God damn it, here we go. And basically what Ukraine could try and do is to get as many troops as possible across the Dnipro and start expanding their influence on in the occupied territories, more than likely at Krinky, since we have a lot of forests that you can push troops into and make use of cover and what have you, and slowly push out from these beachheads, you know, a couple of 100 meters at a time, until you have established a proper foothold. And in so doing, Ukraine would more than likely, in the long run, try and push out to this yellow line here. That is a canal that is leading from the Dnipro all the way down to Crimea. It's a wide canal. It's a natural obstacle, natural defensive barrier, I should say. So if you push out to the canal, you can then use it as a very good defensive barrier to hold the Russians at bay on the eastern side of the canal, which would allow Ukraine to focus on liberating this part of the country. But crossing a river is dangerous, and it's not easy getting heavy equipment across, like vehicles and stuff like that. So if you're going to be doing something like this, it's best to do it together with a big push further inland along the big southern front line. So the Russians will have to draw forces to that big threat along the southern front line, and then you can send troops over the river here to fight forces that are not as heavily reinforced. And another option in the same area, and this is interesting, you guys, out of the 82 votes, this option got 37%. So this is what you guys are clearly advocating and what you think is going to happen. And that is I mean, big-ass amphibious assault across the ocean in an attempt to grab the peninsula over here. Like I said, out of the 82 that voted, 37% thought that this was Ukraine's best bet in trying to grab the peninsula and get troops and vehicles on the ground over here. And I'll be honest, yes, it does make some sense. I mean, just by looking at the maps, we don't know the logistics, we don't know what manpower Ukraine has available, we don't know what ships, boats, and stuff like that they have available to conduct an amphibious assault. But just looking at the maps, it does make some sense. If you have Ochakiv here, this is Ochakiv, you can see, big industrial town, industrial ports. So here you can clearly prepare an amphibious assault with these ports and then launch it over the sea at Pokrovsk. You also have Odessa, also industrial town, industrial city with big ports that would allow you to send troops over the city. Bit far maybe, but you know, the possibility exists. And the peninsula itself is very well suited for amphibious assaults. As you can see here, Pokrovsk, this is the area around Pokrovsk here. I mean, you can easily get smaller boats and amphibious craft up to the shoreline and deploy Marines onto the peninsula itself. And likewise, if you come from Odessa or if you go around this way and try and attack the beaches here, take a look, the beaches here. I forgot the headset shuts down. If you take a look at the beaches here, I mean, this here, I mean, you can just sail straight up to shore and unload all the troops you want. So the peninsula itself is very well suited for amphibious assaults. The problem is you don't have all that much cover, and that's not all that many places to hide once you are ashore. There's also another problem that the Russians have planned for this very thing. If you take a look at this here, here is where they have built their defensive line. They're clearly not preparing to, or they clearly don't intend to defend every inch of the shoreline here, every beach. So they expect the Ukrainians to launch an assault here, and then the Russians intend to defend this choke point here. Meaning that this entire peninsula has probably been pre-sighted for artillery. And the moment Ukrainians set foot on the peninsula, the Russians can just send in accurate artillery fire right from the get-go, basically. And then Ukraine would have to gather the troops they could while being harassed by artillery and then try and breach through the trenches here. So yes, this is an interesting option because it is well suited for amphibious attacks, and the fact that the Russians have built their defenses on the choke point here indicates that they too realize that this peninsula is very likely a good option for the Ukrainians. And it actually doesn't end there. God damn it, here we go. Because here we have Ochakiv, where we had the ports that were well suited for an assault across the ocean. If we go up the river to Mykolaiv and what's this called, Halitno, this is a very good staging point for the Ukrainians if they want to launch an assault directly at the Russian defensive line down here. Because take a look at the industrial ports along this river. I mean, if you get proper ships, the proper boats needed, Ukraine can send a big force down this river straight at the Russian defensive line here, and they stand a good chance of actually securing the peninsula. I mean, I guess we can assume that Russians have a lot of anti-ship missiles ready, since they have built proper defenses down here. But even so, you know, this is a good spot for Ukraine to try and attempt an amphibious assault, if they have the ships for it, obviously. So what could they potentially try? I think that Ukraine could potentially launch an amphibious assault if they have the ships and manpower to do it, from the north and grab the peninsula. And if they do that, then they could push out and follow the Dnipro and try and reach one pocket of or one beachhead at a time, moving along the Dnipro. It would also allow them to potentially bypass Russian defensives. Since Ukrainians have gotten across the Dnipro, Russia has more than likely prepared the defenses and mined the entire area to deny further pushes from Ukraine. So going ashore here and then moving inland could allow Ukraine to bypass the minefields and the defenses, and then outmaneuver the Russians and support each beachhead in turn. And then they could, like I said before, move south and liberate all the territory west of the canal. But now we're going to be talking about Verbove, because this is where I think Ukraine will launch their next attack, despite me saying earlier that Verbove more than likely is heavily fortified at this point. But I still think that this is where they will make their attempt, and I will explain why. And there we go. So Verbove, yeah, located here. This is where the Ukrainians tried to push south towards Tokmak, and where they were fighting at the Robotyne and stuff like that. So they inched their way forward through the minefields, and then they saw an opportunity and sent in something like 80 or 100 vehicles with all the troops that comes with it straight southeast. They had been going southeast the entire time, by the way, but big lunge southeast towards Verbove. So they had been slowly going down this way. They had always moving southeast, and they grabbed Robotyne, and then they made a lunge towards Verbove. So Robotyne was more than likely, they needed to secure the flank, so they grabbed Robotyne. That could anchor the flank, and then they were in a position where they could jump at Verbove, and they tried and failed. And well, as you can see, it makes sense because there's a big gap here in the Russian defensive line. And if you get through here basically, and into this town, this small town, you can bypass a lot of trenches, a lot of defensive fortifications, and then you are basically, if you get this far, you're at the end of it. You're basically through. Yes, you have to get through this last line of defense, obviously, but if you get through this small breach, get into this town and fight your way through the town, it's going to be hell on earth. Make no mistake about it, but then you are essentially through. And if you're through here, then there's no defensive lines. There's nothing. Russia probably have prepared minefields, but they can't mine everywhere because they need to be able to move their own troops behind the defensive line. They need to be able to move in reinforcements to be able to counterattack if Ukraine gets this far. So yes, there will be minefields, but they will not be as dense as up here. So if you get through, then you can start pushing through and start maneuvering behind the Russian lines. And why Verbove? Because, I mean, Russia knows that this is a weak point at this stage. So they will have fortified and mined all of this area like insane by now, right? So why do I think this is still where they will be making the attack? Well, I mean, take a look at this. If they're gonna be going down here, how many kilometers is it before they reach the line? Same thing here. How many kilometers was it? 8? So we got 8 here, 8 or 10 here. If they want to try or go down here, Jesus Christ, not gonna happen. But here at Robotyne and Verbove, take a look. I mean, they are at the defensive line. They don't have to go through and clear out 8 to 10 kilometers of ambushes, of defensive barriers, of trenches, of minefields and kill boxes and stuff like that. Here they are at the defensive line. They are already at it. If they launch an attack, they won't be fighting over farmland and stuff like that. They will be attacking directly at the Russian defensive line. So that is why I think this is where they will be attacking. Despite that Russia has fortified Verbove to no end by now. Because, because they don't have to go through all the minefields. They don't have to go across the wide open farmlands. They can go straight into the Russian defensive lines here. They can go straight into Verbove and fight hard in order to reach the far end of the Russian defensive line. And Verbove, it's a small town. Make no mistake about it, this is not a big settlement at all. I mean, take a look at this. If we use this road here as reference, it's this one right here. So this is Verbove. There's one main street going straight through the valley, and then you have buildings, residential buildings on either side, and gardens and what have you, probably some stores along the way. It's like an old Wild West town, right? With the main street and then buildings on either side. So this is Verbove. This small town. So if Ukraine can push along this street, grabbing all these small buildings along the way, I mean, they're through. Then they are through. This is what's between them and breaking through the Surovikin line. This small town, this one street with a handful of buildings. It's not a big city. It's not a massive town. It's one street. That's it. But we have to remember that yes, it looks easy on the map, but remember this town, Stepove, outside of Avdiivka, that Ukraine has managed to hold for how long? And it's this one narrow little street that Russia has failed to push along, right? And this town is, I mean, this is a hamlet by comparison. It's a small village, not at all comparable to Verbove. Yet Ukraine successfully defended this small village against numerous Russian attacks. So Stepove should give us an indication how difficult it will be for Ukraine to push through Verbove, despite it being a very small town with only one street. So we have to keep that in mind, and that should tell us just how difficult and how devastating the fight will be going through this town. But if they succeed, then Ukraine has a lot of options. If they do manage to push through and grab Verbove, then they can start to push along each trench line, widening the gap, widening the breach, especially to the south towards Solotka Balka, Peninsula, and Otcheretuvate. And even if they push north, they can start to roll up all the defensive lines outside of Polui. And then you have a full-on breach, and then you can start sending through tanks and armored vehicles and what have you, and really exploit the gap that you have achieved by grabbing Verbove. And of course, if you get that far, then you are through. And yes, this area, there will be minefields, but not on the same level as up here. Not at all. So yes, this took months. This here may take weeks. Because remember, the Russians, they want to be able to send in their own troops. They want to be able to move around back here freely. So they can't mine everything. They can't mine every road. They can't mine every field. So Ukraine, if they get through Verbove, then they can start maneuvering. And then you can bypass the Russian defenses and head for Tokmak. You can move in around south of Polui and threaten this big city. A very vital city. If you can cut this one off, you have gained a lot in uprooting the Russians in this part of Ukraine. And of course, you can push straight for Chernivka, a vital railroad hub, and that would allow Ukraine to cut supply lines for the Russians going east and west. And if you have Chernivka, then you can continue southward towards the Sea of Azov with hopes of cutting the Russians in half, basically. But easier said than done, and it sounds very nice when you do the armchair general thing and talking about this. Yeah, look at this, I drew a arrow on a map. It's so easy. It's not going to be easy. This box here, this is the Achilles heel at the moment of the Russian defenses all along the front line from Kherson all the way up to Kupiansk. This box is the most vital area along the entire front line at this moment. This is where Ukraine can breach through, and this is where Russia can crush all Ukrainian hope of ever winning the war. So Verbove is, I mean, you're talking about Bakhmut, you're talking about Avdiivka and stuff, places like that. They are insignificant. Completely insignificant. There is basically only one town, if you ask me, that has any strategical value at this point, and that is this town here, Verbove. So if Ukraine gets through, they can win the war. If Russia can hold Verbove, then Russia can win war. That's just how it is at the moment. So this red box, Ukraine will have to sacrifice, I don't know, a horrendous amount of troops in order to get through this red box. And maybe their new commanding general is the right man for the job. Maybe he will give that order to just send in the troops needed to punch through, despite all the casualties that Ukraine will suffer, in order to eventually get through and potentially maybe win the war. That's it. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it interesting. And with that said, go på marsch, Ukraine. Give them hell.